first question is, tell me about your faith journey.
Where do you want me to begin? Way back?
At the beginning.
The beginning?
Okay, well, let me tell you. I was not born in the United States. I was born in Europe back in 1938. Okay. As far as I remember as a child, I never saw a church. My parents fled. You know what a refugee is? Okay. So we were refugees from 1943 till 1950. Okay. So we were refugees the entire time. I never saw a church. The first church that I actually attended is when we arrived in America, and that was in 1950. This is a doctor who sponsored us over. For the 2 years that we were there, from 1950 to 1953, we never went to church. Even though my mother was Lutheran, my father was Catholic. So the first church, then from Texas, Houston, Texas, we wound up in Pittsburgh. So I was 15 years old, and that's when I went to my first time into a church. And I was confirmed there, okay, and attended. After that, I was drafted in the military back in 1961. But in Pittsburgh, yeah, that's when we attended my first church, and we went regularly. So anyway, and then I was drafted, and then I went to Vietnam, and was in the military 6.5 years. There was very little as far as church was concerned until we came to Atlanta. Okay, when we came to Atlanta, we lived in Decatur, and we attended a Lutheran church, and then we moved to Covington, and then we attended a Lutheran church at Conyers. Okay, we were very active. We were ushers. I was involved with the youth group and stuff like that, and we had a great pastor, and that pastor moved out, and as we decided to come over, we had a lot of friends over here at the Presbyterian Church. And he's one of them over there. and then, of course, you know, Billy Wade, of course, you know him. When my in-laws, they had the memorial service for my father-in-law and my mother-in-law. There were members there. And so we decided to come to FBC right here. I don't know how many years ago. It had to be, I lost my wife Ursula, it was about 6-7 years ago, so I guess we've been coming here about approximately 10 years, okay? That's how we came here to here, right here. So, what's the next question?
What do you love about our congregation?
Oh my gosh. They're so friendly and warm. And after each service, you know what, I get to hug the lady. They come to hug me. And that's the best part of it. No, really. No, I think the congregation is very warm, and we made a lot of friends, and they invited me for dinner and lunches and stuff like that. So that's what, as far as the congregation is concerned. Okay?
How have you served in the church over the years?
Oh, I have a pressure washer. And I do the member garden. That's for my wife. That's where she's at, and she tells me what to do. So, I do all the member garden stuff. I do the sidewalk, and of course, I have help. And all the benches, everything. I've done it 2 or 3 times over the years. That's my contribution to the church. Today, because of my health issues, I need help when I pressure wash. But anyway, and I feed the birds. Okay. What's next?
Last question. What advice would you give to a person new to faith or church?
I will tell them to join. Because of the congregation, it's they're warm, and and the messages, of course, is always there from the sometimes I come over here, and the church, and the message is so powerful to me that sometimes I just choke up and I have tears coming down my eyes. And there are certain songs that are being sung in the church that touch me, okay? But let me just tell you about, I'm going to go back. I was probably about 15 or 16 years old, lived in Pittsburgh. I was a stock boy for a supermarket. And my parents had an argument, really, really bad. They didn't, not physical, but just an argument. And I walked 3 miles to the supermarket, okay? And my tears were just rolling down my eyes. I was so hurt and frustrated and just all of a sudden, a feeling came over me. I could not get over it. And you know what? What was it? I'm thinking it was the good Lord. And it never, I mean, I'll never forget it. It was so warm. So anyway, you know, from that day on, I don't think my parents ever argued ever again. I'm just saying that, but that to me, it told me there is a God. Okay? So, what else?
Well, thank you for doing this.
Wow, this is easy.
You passed A+.
You got ladies waiting outside to hug me?
All right.
Okay. First question.
Okay,
Tell me about your faith journey.
okay, it started many years ago. Macon, Georgia, First Baptist Church, Reverend A.C. Bailey.
Wow.
Fire and brimstone was his motto. And as my younger brother says, he would go home after service and be just terribly afraid. And I sort of got the impression you either join or else. And fortunately, we had some very fine people, parents of friends of mine, and they were just tip top. So I was baptized primarily because of them, rather than because of the preaching there. And then in the Army, maybe a little bit before Leonard was in 58 to 60, and that was after medical school. Was stationed in the DMZ, demilitarized zone of Korea, and fortunately had a fine chaplain, and he organized us into where we had a choir. Went around, we were up north of the Imjin River, so we were isolated from civilians and so forth. And this man was just fantastic. And we had a group from the medical section that went around to several of the units, and we had a choir. It really was quite good. And we just all enjoyed our experience. Now, when I came back and got out of the army, was in another church, in Baptist church for, oh gosh, 20 years, I guess. And my dear wife had been as a student, had gone to the Southern Baptist Convention. She had lifelong friendships with other students that went out into the hitherlands, I guess, in the summertime, and she, my wife, had the children's choirs, and her best friend played the piano, and they were really quite good. We came here, and as I said, was in another church, and this starts the sad part, or maybe unforgivable, but because of some terrible conflicts that I won't go into, we became unchurched for, oh gosh, 20 years, I guess. And we both missed it. Now, during that time, we talked about going to the Presbyterian Church. As a matter of fact, my wife had a group of children for a Christmas play and a children's choir. That's been many years ago. My fraternity, we had a fraternity brother who was a Presbyterian minister. And so we talked about it so many times to going to the Presbyterian church. But unfortunately, it was just talk, we never did. And when you ask about the journey, and I became good friends with Tom White. In fact, he and I were co-chairman of the Heart Association, Heart Sunday. And of course, Tom was just fantastic. But anyway, as I say, the sad part was we stayed disassociated for a long time. Your next question is?
How did you become involved at FPC? At First Presbyterian Church?
Well, after my dear wife died, I had a good friend, Ed Puda. Some of you know. Ed and I had been friends for 60 years, I guess. So, and Mary had died, so I started coming with Ed. Now, that's when Stephen Barnes was here. And after a few Sundays, I joined, and unfortunately, well, Ed and I would sit in the same pew, and when you'd have the congregational singing, Ed would say, "I didn't hear you." And I would say, "Count your blessings." I joined while Stephen was here. And then Neely came, and I was probably one of her first visitors. Because my family and I had been in England for a year and had some American neighbors that were named Rents. So I thought, what a coincidence it would be if this was woman. And they had a daughter, had two daughters actually. That this may be one of the daughters, but it wasn't.
But it was a good story.
That's been four years ago.
What do you love about our congregation?
I think they are as friendly and literally loving group that I've ever run across. And when a new person comes in, they welcome them, and I have just loved the friendliness, and the other thing is, as Neil says every Sunday, come as you are. Makes me think that, and I don't think that she is limiting that, come as you are, how you look. I think come as you are as a whole person, emotionally, whatever. And really thought that was why the church is growing.
How have you served in the church over the years?
Well, as I said, it's only been 4 years. And I guess, let's see, I've been on 2 or 3 committees. And tried to fulfill the duties there. And to my great surprise, was elected a deacon. And I found out right off that a deacon in Presbyterian church is different from a deacon in the Baptist church.
No authority.
Yeah, and that reminds me of how also had been a deacon in the previous church. It's just kind of funny that a person was elected the deacon in the Baptist church and was being introduced to the board of deacons and asked, did he have anything to say? And he just had one thing to say. He said, "You've had your last unanimous decision."
Oh.
And the Sunday school class, I have been labeled a teacher, but I think Theodosia and Larry would agree that it's not so much teaching as it is starting the conversation.
Yeah.
The leader, but it takes a good deal of research.
Yeah.
But, and I look forward to doing that, unless my senility gets the best of me.
Last question. What advice would you give a person new to faith or church?
Advice, I would say that don't be bashful, because the congregation will not be bashful with you. They will be putting out their hand to welcome you, and jump right in, and you'll never regret it.
The first question is, tell me about your faith journey.
Well, I was born at a very early age. And my mother happened to be in the hospital. And I wanted to be close to her, so I was born near her. And she couldn't take me anymore when I was 2. She said, I've got to get this kid somewhere else. So she put me in the Presbyterian kindergarten. And I was a terror in the kindergarten. But I loved, that's where I got into the Presbyterian church. It was, my grandfather had been you know what a foot washing Baptist is? He was a foot washing Baptist. I think he preached some too.
Primitive Baptist.
Primitive Baptist. You're right. Tom knows about primitive people. And I kind of grew up, I had a preacher, and what I want to say is that a lot of faith journeys go with people that you meet along the way. And I had this great preacher named Dr. Fouché. Dr. Fouché was not just a preacher, he was a magician. And he would do all these tricks, and he would get the children's attention, and and that made us listen to what he was saying and hear him preach. And I joined the choir. Believe it or not, I was a soloist. You won't believe that, but that's all right. I just grew up in the church, and it was such a vital part. I mean, we went Sunday morning, Sunday evening, we went Wednesday nights. Our whole social life came from the church. My best friends were in the church, and all I knew was church. And Dr. Fouché was just, I mean, I can't tell you what an influence he had. But what I really wanted to do was be an athlete. I thought, man, if I could just, be an athlete. But I found I was allergic to pain, and I couldn't hit, I couldn't jump, and I couldn't catch. And so I had another teacher, Miss Griffin, was my 10th grade teacher. And she said, Larry, forget all about being an athlete. be a scholar. So I began to, I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. And I began to study all these things in school, and all the science courses, and the math courses, and whatnot. And I really became very interested in it. Matter of fact, humbly speaking, I won a scholarship for 4 years in college. And I went to this college in Memphis. It's called Rhodes College now. It's Southwestern then. And I had no idea of being a preacher. I wanted to be something. I thought about being a reporter at one time because I was editor of my school paper, and I wanted to write. I love to write. I love to write stories. And Dr. Fouché was still there, and he kept on with me and Miss Griffin. So she really kind of focused me, and she was the sponsor of the newspaper, so I got to know her really well. And then I went to college, and I didn't do well in biology. I hated biology. Biology was just terrible.
I love that. That's
And
why.
I thought, well, I can't be a doctor. I thought, well, medicine. I was interested in medicine too, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I met another person, and this person was I was in a fraternity there, and this person was we call him Goody. His name was Goodbar, and he was the alumni director of Southwestern of the college. And Goody just took me under his wing, and he said, "You need to think about the ministry." Well, I didn't want to do ministry. I wanted to do something else. So I decided I was going into politics. I wanted to be the next governor of the state of Tennessee. I had a cousin who was the governor of Tennessee once, and I just wanted to do that. And so I studied some political science. You know what that is? Political science. And kind of got into some of the politics of the school and so on and so forth. I won't go into all that, but it was interesting. And but my last year, I had another man named Jameson Jones. And Dr. Jones took me aside. He said, "Why don't you consider, what are you going to do next year when you graduate?" I said, "I'm not real sure." He said, "Well, why don't you go to the ministry?" And I said, "I don't want to go to the ministry. I just don't want to do that." And every time I thought about it, I wanted to throw up, you know. Going into the ministry is like throwing up, you know. You can put it off for a while, but pretty soon you got to let it loose and go. Anyway, my brother had gone to seminary, and he was another person in my life. I wanted to kind of do some of the things he did, and he had gone to seminary before me, gone to Union Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, and that's part of my faith journey. And I decided, okay, I'll go to seminary. Well, I didn't like it. I was probably the most conservative guy at this seminary at that time, you know, and they were talking about things that were way over my head and whatnot. And so I quit 2 times. And I went to the dean of the seminary, and I said, "I can't do this anymore. I can do Greek, and I can do Hebrew, and I can do this, but I can't do this anymore." His name was Dr. Appleby. And Dr. Appleby took me under his wing and said, "You can't quit. Just stay with it. Just stay with it, and just hang with it." So I did that, and I had 2 or 3 other people on campus, and the second year in seminary, in order to pay my tuition for seminary, I was a member of the drama team. So I got to do dramatics, and we would go all over the churches in Washington, D.C., and we'd go to Virginia, and all. And I thought, well, maybe I can be an actor, you know. I was an actor. And Dr. Fouché was still there, and he was just prodding me on. I was kind of a day. I would go back and forth in college, and then in seminary I would go on too. But anyway, people just made things, and then I decided to go into the ministry and be ordained, and I was in a big church in Tennessee, and I was the associate pastor, and I started learning how that pastoring was probably the most important function you did. I couldn't preach much, but I could pastor, you know, and I love pastoring, and that kind of set me on the journey. And I've done that. I was 16 years. I was in the preaching in church on a regular basis, and then I decided I couldn't do this any longer. And when I left my church in Atlanta, I decided to do something else. And I still stayed preaching, but I wanted to be a pastor. I wanted to pastor people, and I went into mental health, and I became a therapist. I got a license and the whole bit, and so for the rest of my life, I have been a therapist, but I've been doing some preaching and pastoring on the side.
Okay. How did you become involved at FPC?
How did I become involved?
At FPC.
Well, I married into it. My wife grew up in this church. Her parents were great, wonderful saints of the church. If you knew Sappy and Mary, Mary was president of moderator of the assembly, yeah, you know. And Sappy, one of the stories about my father-in-law was that before this sanctuary was built, they were talking about that they needed more room. And he stood up on a table in the kitchen and looked down at all his friends out there and told them, we need to build this church for the future. Billy remembers that well. I don't know if you remember that or not, but they were the saints.
I was at home with the boys.
Some of the saints that built this church. And when I came, we moved back here in 2001, and I just started coming to the church. I mean, I had been to coming, and Billy Wade needed somebody to write his sermons for him. And he would, every now and then when they got desperate, they'd let me preach, you know. And I've been preaching ever since. And that's been my work in the church.
Okay. What do you love about our congregation?
I love what Tom said. I love it because it's in Leonard. It's a very loving, very giving, very unselfish, very outgoing, and I love how they pastor people. I went through 4 cancers, and I was at Emory Hospital a lot, and other hospitals, and the pastoring in this church was just so meaningful to me. Again, it was people helping you along in your faith. People are so important in this congregation to me, and I think to others, and to the community at large.
How have you served in the church over the years?
Well, not well, but I'm sure. It was I preach, I teach. I've never been a deacon like Tom, but I haven't missed it. I am still a teaching elder, and I belong to Savannah Presbytery since I was in Savannah my last charge. So I just kind of I think we're very loving, giving, community-based. The preaching is all right, I love the preaching too. I think except when she wears wild shirts, you know, I think we got the best preaching going on. I think we got the best pastor going on. I'm very proud of the blessings that we have.
Right. And last question. What advice would you give a person new to the faith and or church?
Well, you kind of listen to the signs, and for others who are telling you about learning about yourself and learning about maybe that God has a plan in your life. And kind of, it'll be worked out in one way or another, I think. And I think you've got to just keep on keeping on. I think you've got to trust. You've got to trust the signs, that you trust the people, trust your own basic instincts. And you got to kind of let it grow.
Oh, that's Dr. Fouché coming out right there.
You let everything grow, you know, it grows and grows and grows and grows, you know. So that's what you gotta do. You gotta let that love and let that faith and let it all grow, because it will. And just trust in God and trust in the people in the church.
Amen. The first question is, tell me about your faith journey.
Tell me about it. You know, Harper, when you ask an old person, especially a woman, about their faith journey or all their years, they got lots of years to talk about. So we're liable to be here real late tonight. I was born at Emory Hospital in Atlanta, and when I was 5 days old, I came to live in Covington, and I've always lived in Covington. And I grew up in the Methodist Church in Covington, you know, the big white Methodist church over there with all the pumpkins. And I had a sister and a brother. Both of them were younger than I was. But I had wonderful, wonderful parents who loved me lots. And they were my first heroes, my first inspiration, because they were good people, but they enjoyed life too. And we went to church every time the door was open. We went on Wednesday night, like we're doing tonight. And we went on Sunday morning and Sunday night. And anytime there was anything going on. And then jumped forward quite a few years. And I met a guy over the swimming pool that was right next to where the YMCA is now in Covington. The swimming pool is no longer there. But he was diving off a high dive, and he was a really good athlete. And we met and we became sweethearts. And his father was a Presbyterian minister. And so when we had, you know, we had romance for a while, and then we got married, but that was part of the deal. I was going to join the Presbyterian church, because this family had always been Presbyterians, and there wasn't anything like Presbyterians, and I caught the bug song too. And we lived right here in Covington, and we lived on a farm, and we had cattle. In fact, we had milking cows to begin with, and I didn't learn to milk, but I helped out on the farm some. And it was a wonderful life. And then we had 4 children, and they grew up on that farm, and we had a great time. And you probably know some of them because they come around, they're members of this church. And I joined this church in 1960, which is a long time ago. And but we married, our wedding was in the Methodist church, but I soon came over here and I joined the Presbyterian church after that. But when I was a little girl, we had Bible school with all the churches in Covington, the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Baptists. And I so well remember coming to this church when I was a little bitty girl and seeing Mr. Dandy, Mr. Marshall B. Dandy. And he would lead the singing, and then he would preach. He did it all, and had a wonderful time. But I knew people who were members of this church too. And but I've always loved this church, and our children loved the church, and we were all really active in the church. And we used to have picnics, church picnics at our house, and we had a swimming pool, and everybody came out and swam. And we had what we called an ice cream social every Wednesday night, and I remember there was one man who said, "Are we gonna have a sociable tonight?" And we had just a delightful time all the time with the church people, and we were just felt so loved, and the children grew up and they had lives, they still have lives of their own. And I got real old and but in this church I did a lot. I taught Sunday school and I did Bible school, and I remember one year I was the director of Bible school and I was the music director, and I also had, on Friday we had a picnic at my house for the under a certain age, and that night we had a sleepover in the barn. And it rained, but we still had a good time. So I really put in a week that week with Bible school. And I was involved in what they call the women of the church then, they call it Presbyterian women now. And I was on the local level and also on Presbyterian level, which is the more Presbyterian churches in metro Atlanta. And but all along I was a member here. And then we had youth, we had interns from Columbia Seminary to come and work with us, and one of them said to me one time, "Why don't you go to the seminary?" And I had not thought about Hope, but I'd been very active, with the church, and I decided I would do that. And I went to Columbia Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, and I drove up there 2 or 3 times a week. And it was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time for me. I learned lots and just met all kinds of wonderful, wonderful people. And the professors were so brilliant and wonderful. But while I was there, our house burned out on the farm. And this church was wonderful to us, just wonderful. Absolutely, I'll never forget coming. In fact, my husband and I and a couple of my children and some of my grandchildren and I were at Montreat at a conference, or maybe it was just a retreat. And my brother called and they called my husband out of the dining room and told my husband that our house was burning. And when we drove home, and people from our church were at that burning up house right then. And I'll never forget how wonderful they brought us food and just took care of us. It made the whole difference, the whole difference. The loss wasn't bad because the people were so sweet to us. And what else? But since then, I have gotten much older, and I have recently been living over at Presbyterian Village in Athens. It's for old folks, but I'm one of the oldest. And we have a wonderful time, and I help with the chaplain some there. But while I was at Columbia Seminary, I did what was called clinical pastoral education for a whole year. And I worked as a chaplain in a hospital. I didn't get paid anything, but I was working at Georgia Baptist Hospital, which was in Atlanta, and it's no longer there. In fact, it became Atlanta Medical Center, I believe, and that's no longer there either. I guess the buildings are. But that meant a lot to me, because I would visit people in the hospital rooms, and it just really fed my spirit. But I talk too much.
What do you love about our congregation?
About our congregation. They're so genuine, so real, and so kind and so loving and forgiving and faithful and always they act like they're eager to see me, and that makes me feel real good. The young folks and the old folks too, but I'm one of the oldest, Carl.
I think we did okay. What advice would you give a person new to faith or church?
Who is coming into the church? Just let God love you. Just don't keep from letting God love you, because it happens. And stick with it. Stay with the church. And that's what I'll tell you. You just let God love you, sugar. You're just delightful. Woo! That's the winner.
Yes.
I'm I'm so glad I got to meet you.
Me too.
Thank you, darling. Let's get together again. Maybe you can bring some of the young folks over to Presbyterian Village at Athens. I'll show you around.
Y'all can have a ping pong tournament.
Oh,
Yeah,
Play ping pong?
I'm playing ping pong.
you might ought to need to
I
learn.
do other things too.
All right, well, let me get y'all's picture.